On Monday, AJC released its State of Antisemitism in America 2022 report. The report, one of the largest and most comprehensive of its kind, confirms that antisemitism remains a severe problem in the United States, requiring urgent attention. Joining us today to dive into these findings are AJC U.S. Director for Combating Antisemitism, Holly Huffnagle, and AJC Senior Director of the Alexander Young Leadership Department, Meggie Wyschogrod Fredman. Moderating our conversation today is AJC Chief Field Operations Officer, Melanie Maron Pell.
Thank you, Claire. Holly and Meggie, thank you both for joining us today for this really important conversation. So Holly, I'd like to start with you. This is now the fourth year that we've conducted this survey, and there are a number of important surveys out there. So why don't we begin by having you explain to our audience why we do this survey, why this data matters, and what makes AJC's survey unique.
Thank you, Melanie. And first, I'll note it's an honor to be here with you and with Meggie to discuss these important findings. So we do this survey because we know American Jews are experiencing anti-Semitism, and we want to know what it looks like over time. So this is the fourth year that we've been doing it, as you noted. So we now have trend data. And this data matters because it's the basis, the foundation, if you will, of our advocacy on anti-Semitism in the United States. And we pride ourselves in data-driven advocacy. And we want our interlocutors to know how robust and reliable this data is. And one thing I want to note is actually the development of these surveys over the past few years. So we create the questionnaires with the policy implications of the results in mind. So what do we want to learn about how different communities think about anti-Semitism? What do we want to know about how American Jews experience anti-Semitism in the workplace or on campus, or how American Jews are experiencing anti-Semitism online? So we have these questions, we put them in the questionnaires, and then the results, the information that we gather is then what guides our efforts and our resources and our priorities as an organization. Now, you did mention that there were a number of surveys out there, which there are. There are several surveys that touch on anti-Semitism or hatred and extremism in some way, but only AJC's report details the many ways that anti-Semitism in America affects the lives and actions of Jews, and at the same time compares those findings to how the American general public perceives the threat. So that is what is unique and valuable. Now, other studies like ADL's, for instance, which measures anti-Semitic attitudes amongst Americans, basically how anti-Semitic Americans are, or others which focus more broadly on American Jewish identity, like Pew. They have a large study that comes out every few years, and it looks at Jewish religious practice, marriage, ethnic and cultural backgrounds, connection to Israel, and there's a small section on anti-Semitism. But all of these surveys actually work together toward getting a national conversation going around the urgent need to combat the problem.
Thank you. So as you said, we survey both American Jews and the general population. So why don't we take a look, and maybe you can walk us through some of the key findings.
So I'll do that now. I'll share my screen. Actually, I think it's always helpful to visualize the data versus me just sharing a bunch of statistics with you. So I want to share really for the first time publicly these findings in this slideshow. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. And I want to start just quickly with methodology, because we always get this question every year. Well, how was this survey conducted? Who was involved? When did it happen, et cetera? So I want to address this right away. And we found that American Jews and the general public, we had a robust response for both. The survey of American Jews was in the field longer. As you can see, it was from end of September to November of 2022. And the survey for the general public was in mid-October for 1 week. And they were conducted a little bit differently. We work with a market research firm called SSRS. And for American Jews, we did interviews by phone and online. And then the general public was solely done online through an opinion panel that SSRS has. And we had 1,507 Jewish respondents, and it's representative of American Jewish society. This is the biggest sample size that AJC has had, looking at just American Jews. And then we had over 1,000 US adults respond to our survey. The margin of error for the Jewish adults was plus or minus 3.4% at the 95% confidence level, and plus or minus 3.8% at the 95% confidence level for the general public. Both something that we can be really proud of, and knowing that this data is accurate. So the first big finding, Melanie, is this sense of security that American Jews are feeling. And we asked, compared to a year ago, do you feel like the status of Jews is more secure, about the same, or less secure than it was in 2021? And we found that 41% of American Jews said that their status is less secure. That number really only tells us something if we look at how American Jews answered in 2021. And you can see here on this graph that in 2021, 31% felt that their status was less secure. So we have a 10 percentage point increase just over the past year. We also found that nearly 4 in 10 American Jews are changing behavior. This is a number that was consistent with last year's findings. And in one of these 3 ways, in at least one of these 3 ways, 23% have avoided publicly wearing, carrying, or displaying things that might identify them as someone who's Jewish. 16% have avoided certain places, events, or situations out of concern for their safety or comfort as someone who's Jewish, and 27% have avoided posting content online that would identify them as someone who's Jewish or reveal their views on Jewish issues. And so it was 38% of Americans had at least one of these things happen to them, which is why we can't add up each of these numbers. That's more than 38%, but we capture at least one American Jew's response to these 3 issues. We also found that 26% of American Jews report being the target of an anti-Semitic incident. This is a 1 in 4. This is a number we had last year as well. It's self-reporting. So we've asked American Jews, did you experience a physical attack? Did you experience an anti-Semitic remark in person? Did you experience, were you personally targeted online, an anti-Semitic remark online? And so these are the percentages. And then that number is 1 in 4 in total have actually experienced one of these, at least one of these 3 things. We also found that 67% of American Jews have seen anti-Semitic content online or through social media, and fully 69% have experienced anti-Semitism, meaning that they have either seen it or were the personal target of anti-Semitism online and on social media. And we did a little bit of a deeper dive and looking at, well, where are you experiencing anti-Semitism on social media? And we found that 45% of American Jews experienced it on Twitter in the past 12 months, 43% on Facebook, 19% on YouTube, 18% on Instagram, 11% on TikTok. And then there were some other social media platforms in there as well. And this is, again, American Jewish adults over the age of 18. It's a reflection probably of also where they're spending their time, but you can actually see where anti-Semitism is experienced the most by American Jews in the last 12 months. We asked a new battery of questions in the workplace and on campus, as well as online. I think this is very interesting. So for the first year, we're able to reveal data on how American Jews who are employed, fully employed or partially employed, not self-employed, but how they experience issues in the workplace. And we found that 1 in 3 of employed American Jews who have avoided or experienced at least one have avoided or experienced at least one of these following issues. So 22% in the past 12 months have avoided expressing their views on Israel. 10% have avoided wearing or displaying something that would identify them as Jewish, 1 in 10. Also 1 in 10 have had trouble taking time off work for the Jewish holidays. And 8%, which again, it's a small number, but when you still think about almost 1 in 10, employed American Jews have felt unsafe or uncomfortable in their workplace because of their Jewish identity in the past year. This is a further study we've done on campus. Meggie will be sharing a little bit more background to this, but I wanted to at least have you see the numbers so we can remember them. We found that over 1 in 3 American Jews with a connection to a college campus say that they've avoided or experienced at least one of the following items asked about this year. So these are students, current students, recent students, or parents of current students or recent students. And by recent, we mean having graduated in the last 2 years. So we only asked this question to people that had that connection to college campuses. It wasn't asked of every American Jewish respondent. We found that 26% experienced difficulty taking time off of class, or were told that they could not miss class for the Jewish holidays. 21% avoided wearing or carrying things that would identify them as Jewish. And almost 1 in 5, 18%, felt uncomfortable or unsafe at a campus event because they are Jewish. And I'll just have a few more slides left that just, again, give to the top lines of what we're finding. And now we're getting into the general public. And I think this is one of the most interesting things that AJC does, is taking what we know American Jews are experiencing and again, getting a sense of what the general public knows about the problem. And this year, we found that 69% of U.S. adults, almost 7 in 10, have heard of anti-Semitism and know what it means. And we can discuss why this is increasing, actually, a little bit later. We also found that Americans are seeing anti-Semitism. In fact, over 1 in 3 Americans, even though Jews make up 2% of the population, 1 in 3 U.S. adults have reported seeing anti-Semitism in the past year. We also know that for those who see anti-Semitism, many of them actually don't report what they've seen. And we can talk about more how to increase that reporting as well. Now, this is what gets to be really interesting, is that comparative aspect. So we asked how much of a problem, if at all, do you think anti-Semitism is in the United States today? And consistently, 9 in 10 American Jews, 89%, say that it's a problem in our country. 68% of Americans do, almost 7 in 10. That's still a pretty big number, but you can still see the divergence between U.S. adults and American Jews recognizing and seeing anti-Semitism as a problem. The bigger divergence comes when we asked about if it's increased, if it stayed the same, if it's decreased. And so over the past 5 years, do you think anti-Semitism has increased? Again, this is a pretty consistent number. 8 in 10 have said, American Jews say that it has increased in the last 5 years. 47% of Americans say that it's increased. So you can see that divergence there as well. What is interesting to point out, though, is we didn't always have this not sure answer as an option for the general public. We offer it to American Jews as well. And we would make the general public decide between increased, stayed the same, and decreased. And we got some different answers. And we realized that some Americans might not know. They might not know if anti-Semitism is increasing or decreasing, what's happening. And so we're really glad we put this question, this response in, not sure, because 13% of Americans actually don't know what's happening with anti-Semitism. We've never asked this question before. This is a question we asked. We asked it in a survey that we did with AJC Paris in France to understand what's happening with French society, and we wanted to see how Americans responded to the question. Do you think anti-Semitism is a problem for everyone, that it affects society as a whole, or do you think it's a problem for Jews, that it doesn't affect society as a whole? And overwhelmingly and amazingly, and this is a great finding, is that 90% of Americans, and again, basically the same number within the margin of error of American Jews, say that anti-Semitism is a problem for everybody. This affects all of us. And then this is my last segment, and I think this is fascinating for our work at American Jewish Committee. We asked Americans, the general public, do you personally know someone who's Jewish? 66% said that they know someone who's Jewish, which some people might look at that and say, that's actually a lot of Americans who know someone who's Jewish, given the percentage of the American population who are Jewish. Still, 1 in 3 said they don't know anyone who is Jewish. 34% said they don't know anyone who is Jewish. But what we found was that those who know Jews and those who know about the Holocaust are actually more likely to better understand anti-Semitism. And so this is what was really interesting. So not only those who know Jews were more likely to know that anti-Semitism is a problem, more likely to know that it's increased. Take a look at this slide right here. We asked questions about the Holocaust as well. And we have a battery of about 4 questions. And we found that Americans, general population, who got 3 or 4 questions correctly, were more likely to know what anti-Semitism is. You can see that's that top bar, that solid yellow bar. Those are greater Holocaust knowledge. Like they've done better on that test. And then those who don't know as much. And you can see that if you know more about the Holocaust, you understand that anti-Semitism has increased in the past 5 years. You understand that anti-Semitism is a serious problem in the United States. And so this is really important when it comes to promoting Holocaust education and raising awareness. et cetera. So I'll stop sharing my screen now. Those are just, again, some of the highlight findings that we have, and we can go from here.
Holly, thank you so much. It's really interesting to see this year's findings. Given that this is the fourth year we've run this survey, are there trends that we can identify?
There are a few trends, and this is what I think is so interesting, because the data on itself, it's only so helpful if you know things are getting better or worse, things are increasing or decreasing, or if it's staying the same. And what's been interesting for us in our fourth year is there's a consistent trend too. So things aren't getting worse or better here, but for the past 4 years, we have seen 9 in 10 American Jews saying anti-Semitism is a problem in the United States. We have seen the same number, 8 in 10, saying that it's increasing. In the past 2 years, the same number of American Jews are saying that they've changed their behavior at least once out of fear of anti-Semitism. And that same number, 1 in 4, have been personally targeted by it. So that consistent trend isn't necessarily a good thing either. But we've also seen some changes. And the first one, which is what the opening slide I showed you, was how that more Jews today think that their status is less secure than a year ago compared to the year before. But when we look at it over a longer timeline, the number this year, that over 40% who say less secure, that's on par with actually how American Jews felt in 2020. This large minority, over 40%, who are feeling less secure. There's also a declining trust we've noticed, Melanie, in law enforcement's effectiveness in responding to the security needs of Jews. This is something that we've just seen over the last few years. One specific example, for instance, is among Orthodox Jews surveyed. For instance, 65% said that law enforcement is effective in responding and addressing their needs. But last year, 81% of Orthodox Jews said that law enforcement was effective. So you do see this just drop just over the course of a year. And then finally, and this is a good trend finding, more U.S. adults see anti-Semitism as a problem. And those who those who responded last year, it was 60% of U.S. adults who said anti-Semitism was a problem last year. It's up to 68% this year. We want to laud that. That's important. And then there's more awareness. There's more awareness of the term and familiarity with the term today. So these are some of the trends that we're noticing.
Great. Thank you so much. And I know people probably have questions about what does this mean? What do we do with it? And I promise our audience we will get to that. We want to talk about that as well. But first, Meggie, I'd like to bring you into the conversation. Meggie, what are some of the key takeaways for young Jews? We surveyed Jews ages 18 to 29. What did we see in that data?
Yeah, so it was really important for us to think about what uniquely young Jews are experiencing. And what we found, which was, kind of a feeling we had, but again, putting empirical data with it is so key, is that indeed young American Jews experience anti-Semitism differently than the generations above them. So a big piece of that is looking at identity for Gen Z and millennials. So identity for Gen Z and millennials, as you know, doesn't just exists in your high school or your dorm or your place of work, your social circle. It's really interwoven with social media, right? Your community exists far beyond just where you physically are. And there's a strength there, but there's also potential for real risk. So one of the things that we found is that young Jews are far more affected by anti-Semitism on social media, both in rates of what they see, but also being victimized by it, than the over 30 set. And two other elements that I would say should really be a wake-up call for us all is first that young Jews aren't just sitting with these experiences, right? They're not just seeing it in that experience ends there. It's really changing their behavior. And they're making decisions, and Holly outlined a lot of this in the data that she presented, decisions to not go to physical places, in some cases that are centers for Jewish life, right? Or choices to hide parts of their Jewish identity, to not wear items that identify them as Jewish. And the second part, and I think this also should really cause us all to take pause, is that young Jews feel like anti-Semitism is not being taken seriously. 6 in 10 of Jewish young adults think anti-Semitism is taken less seriously than other forms of hate. And what that means is we have a generation who feels unseen, a generation who feels like they are overlooked. I think both, within, if it's their campus or within broader American society. And that's something that should concern us both for what it means for American Jewry, but I also think it should concern us for broader American society and what that means for addressing hate today.
And you mentioned campus. So in this year's survey, we included new questions that we have not asked before, directed toward current and recent college students and their parents. So what did we learn from those questions?
Yeah. So over the last year, it really feels like we're experiencing a surge of anti-Semitism that's particularly affecting young Jews on campus. But as you mentioned, for the first time, to really gain a better understanding, we specifically surveyed either those who are current students, those who had been students within the last 2 years, so recent grads, or parents of current students. And what we found does support that feeling, but actually in certain areas, it actually paints an even more dire picture. So more than a third of current or recent Jewish college students feel like they've encountered challenges on campus related to Jewish identity. And I want to pull out a few of those. Just again, Holly had them, which outlined the broader survey, but they really deserve our attention. So 1 in every 5 Jewish college student reported feeling unsafe on campus because of their Jewish identity. Another really important piece is more than 1 in 10 current students felt like they have been excluded for a campus event or a group because of assumed or actual connection to Israel. Now, that's really important because if you're a young Jew on campus today and you feel like you have to hide part of your identity, that's an issue, right? Campuses are supposed to be the beacon of open exchange of ideas. If we have students who feel like they have to minimize part of their identity, that's a challenge. Holly raised earlier, more than a quarter felt difficulty around taking off class for Jewish holidays. And this also is one that really sits with me, that almost 1/5 felt uncomfortable or unsafe at a campus event because they're Jewish. So these findings really speak to a level of fear, a level of intimidation, that we can't allow to be normalized. And that's part of our work at AJC of making sure that it's not normalized. But we're really calling on university administrations, on those within the campus space to see, utilize these findings, see what's happening, because an environment where Jewish students feel physically at risk or feel like they are facing either social isolation or in any way being forced to choose parts of their identity is not a campus environment that I think any American should feel proud of at the moment.
Thank you, Meggie. And we'll come back in a little bit to some of the ways in which AJC is working on campus and working with students. But Holly, I'd like to turn back to you. Just in terms of the timing of our survey, it happened to be conducted. We certainly didn't plan it this way, but it was the same month that Kanye West unleashed his own brand of anti-Semitism, and a lot of his comments and tweets went viral on social media. So we noted in our survey, as you noted, that it appears that awareness of anti-Semitism is rising. Can we see any small silver lining in the situation with Kanye?
I've thought about this a lot. It's a tough question. We knew this survey was going to be in the field in October 2022, months before October 2022. And to think that American Jews and the general public are taking a survey about anti-Semitism in America, when in the decade I've been working on this issue, it hasn't been mainstreamed as much as it has been in October and November of 2022, is not something that we necessarily asked for, but it's really interesting to see how it played out. And we don't know directly how it impacted, but we can see that more Americans knew about anti-Semitism this year. We actually can look to last year's survey when we asked, are you familiar with anti-Semitism? 16% of US adults in 2021 said they've never even heard the word. And many more couldn't define it, but 16% had said, I have never heard that word before. This year, it was only 9% had never heard the word. So we actually can see that uptick in awareness over the past year. Anti-Semitism, because I think it was so much in the news and because Kanye West spread it to millions of people, we do know that that awareness has increased amongst the general population. So that's a silver lining. And thankfully, because the majority of Americans, do see anti-Semitism as a problem, they do say overwhelmingly that it affects society as a whole. So as far as we know, at least from our survey respondents, Kanye's messaging wasn't making them anti-Semites. It was, again, increasing that awareness of the problem. But I think, Melanie, the question we have to ask ourselves now is, well, what do we do with this increased familiarity, right? Like, how do we continue to shine a spotlight on what is a daily reality for many American Jews? I spoke to, many different communities, outlets in October and November about what was happening with Kanye. And most of the responses were like, this just came up. This is horrible. How could this be happening? And when I would say, well, the American Jewish community has been dealing with rising anti-Semitism for the last several years, people weren't aware. They weren't aware that this was a problem that kind of culminated in some ways with Kanye's anti-Semitism. And so that's what we're trying to do now, is making sure that spotlight is still on the issue.
And in terms of what the general public is experiencing and aware of, obviously they're on social media a lot too. We all are. Can you just say a little bit more about what we saw about what's happening online? You just alluded to it, but what else did we learn about what is happening specifically online? We know so much is going on there that is troubling.
We know what's so interesting is last year we asked American Jews if they've been personally targeted by anti-Semitism online. And the numbers weren't as big as we thought they would be, 12, 13% of American. And so we had to ask the question we asked that question again, but we also had to ask the question, have you seen it? Where have you seen anti-Semitism? And that really just broadened it to that 69% of fully experienced anti-Semitism online. 85% of young Jews have. So it's just, we really got more information by just asking a different question. We did the same thing with the general public. So in years past, we've actually asked the general public, have you seen anti-Semitism? And this year, the number was very similar. Over 1 in 3, 36% said, I've seen it. I've seen anti-Semitism in the past 12 months. But this year, we asked a follow-up question. We asked where? Well, where did you see anti-Semitism? And for those people, Americans, general population who had seen anti-Semitism in the past year, 82% said that they had seen it online or on social media. And so that's where we know it is. That's where we know it's spreading. The next highest location of seeing anti-Semitism was on the street. 19% of Americans who saw anti-Semitism said they saw it on the street, but 19%, that's a huge gap from the 82% who saw it online. 14% saw it in a store, 10% on public transit. So much smaller numbers. The majority of U.S. adults are seeing anti-Semitism online, and in light of how American Jews are experiencing it online, and we captured that too, and that how the general public is seeing it online. That's actually why AJC launched an awareness raising campaign yesterday on this issue, detailing this anti-Semitism on the various platforms, and we're actually calling specifically on social media companies to adopt a series of recommendations that we're providing them, given these findings.
Thank you. I think, and again, we'll come back and get into a little bit more detail about what some of the proscriptions we can offer are. Meggie, I want to just go back to you for a moment. And as we think about young people, your work at AJC, you're working and interacting with college students and young professionals all the time. Are you hearing, does our survey data match what you're hearing anecdotally in terms of the experiences of young people and college students?
So it absolutely does. And I think, by the way, part of what was so critical about our survey is that what we're seeing and hearing is essential, but we really needed data to actually be able to utilize it, both with policymakers, also with university administrators. I can even just think back of the last few weeks. There was a particularly egregious incident that happened in Denver, where students had mezuzot on their door ripped down, pork products attached to a Jewish student's door. I think of UC Santa Barbara that had anti-Semitic graffiti University of Michigan, where we have had students chanting through campus from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, and really advocating violence there. So the answer is yes. I do think what is also important, both for our data and for those anecdotes, is it's important for us to remember that's half of the equation. So there is no question, and again, our data speaks to this, that anti-Semitism is rising on campus, and we have to call it out because our silence risks normalization. And that's an issue we've really been experiencing, particularly with young Jews. We mentioned, feeling this kind of social isolation, like you can't speak out. We need people to speak out. The other part of the equation, though, that we have to remember is that Jewish life for most students on campus is indeed very vibrant, right? The students who we deal with, the student leaders we see, they inspire me, right? There is a resilience, an excitement, a pride of being Jewish, and something also that they don't want to be. Our young Jews don't want to be defined just as the challenge and the anti-Semitism that they are receiving. So it's a balance for us where it's really important also for their safety, for their future, for us to call out this hate, identify it, again, not stay silent so we normalize, but also remember that we have young Jews on campus who are building really, really strong Jewish life and are very proud of their identity.
And it is inspiring. It truly is. And I think it's really important that we remember that we're always working to support them and prevent the bad, but also supporting and accelerating the good. So, Holly, we often get asked the question, naturally, why? Why does anti-Semitism seem to be exploding and coming at us really from all directions? How do you answer that question?
So, Melanie, it's a question we get this question a lot. One thing I should note from the start is that our survey actually does not measure an increase in anti-Semitism itself, right? Other research out there shows the increase in incidents over the years, so we can look to that. Although I will note that our survey found that the majority of Jews don't report the anti-Semitism they experience. So these numbers of incidents may be even higher for those who collect them. But I want to put this moment in a larger context. When we look at the long history of anti-Semitism, its presence in the United States, most historians will say that anti-Semitism has been sporadic until the 1920s in our country. And in the 1920s, and then it became a more constant feature through World War II and the Holocaust. And then we kind of see it declining again in the 60s and 70s. And thankfully today, discrimination is less as American Jews no longer face quotas, restrictions in school, work, housing, which they once did. And so that's important to note. But there's something different, again, in this moment. And that is anti-Semitism is primarily conspiratorial. It's spread online and on social media, reaching more and more people in the last decade. And we see the offline repercussions. And Melanie, you asked, why is it rising? And it's in part because of several factors working at once. So the rising conspiratorial thinking, economic challenges, societal divisions, including over the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, right? Where Jews are blamed or excluded for what's happening overseas in our country. The fading legacy of the Holocaust is one. People don't know where unchecked anti-Semitism can lead. Ignorance, again, about what anti-Semitism is. There's more sources today. And then I think the most dominantly is the internet and social media. So because of these coinciding factors, I would say it's contributed to anti-Semitism becoming more of a regular feature in the United States right now. In the last 5 years, I would term it. I'll not compare what's happening now to what we saw in the 30s, not at all, but the regularity, the consistency, that is something that can be maybe more comparable, which means it means that the interventions, like the fight against it, must also be regular as they were maybe in previous times in our history. And then the last thing I just have to say is that these numbers speak for themselves. We are confident in the findings. We've been confident in the findings of the last 4 years. The numbers, they don't need to be sensationalized. They already show the current problem. They reveal how American Jews are responding. As Meggie pointed out about the vitality of Jewish life on campus, I think we also talk about that the majority of Jews have not changed their behavior. The majority have not been personally targeted by anti-Semitism. but 1 in 4 have been. And 4 in 10 have changed their behavior out of fear of anti-Semitism in the last year. 1 in 5 American Jews, 19%, said they felt unsafe, very or somewhat unsafe when attending their Jewish institutions because of anti-Semitism. We are very specific, not because of COVID, not because of something else, but because of anti-Semitism, 1 in 5. And so because those numbers exist, even if they might look small, that's one too many. And that's what we need to be doing to push anti-Semitism back to the fringes of society.
So in terms of what we do, AJC has developed an array of tools to help combat anti-Semitism and to create essentially roadmaps for different sectors of society. We created what we call our call to action. And can you explain a little bit about what that is and how we intend it to be used?
AJC's call to action, it was published in September of 2022. I wish we would have published it years ago, but it took the collection in many ways of prescriptions of what different sectors of society need to be doing to combat anti-Semitism. But it's really a mobilizing society-wide resource for everyone to take action. And it, again, specifically lays out for America how to recognize anti-Semitism, how to respond to anti-Semitism, how to prevent anti-Semitism. And the call to action has specific audiences. So the media, corporate America, government, social media, educational institutions, law enforcement, our coalition partners. And it gives them the tools and resources they need to act. And we published this resource, Melanie, in part because of the data we've been finding over the years. We've been realizing that the onus of responsibility to protect the Jewish community, to speak out against anti-Semitism, it can't just be left to government. It can't just be left to law enforcement, like those who do have a duty to protect the community. It really needs a society-wide response for society as a whole to respond. Thank goodness 9 in 10 Americans say that anti-Semitism is a problem for everyone. And the call to action is that tool to show what everyone can be doing to counter it.
Thank you. And in a moment, I'm going to ask to maybe drill down a little bit into some of the call to action, just some examples of what we're asking. But Meggie, when we think about how we are responding and helping on campuses and how we're helping to prepare and empower younger Jews who are heading to campus, what are some of the ways we're helping?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's so central to AJC. So zooming out when thinking about anti-Semitism, of course, anti-Semitism is an issue perpetuated by non-Jews, right? And incumbent on the non-Jewish audience to not perpetuate that. But identifying and calling out anti-Semitism is something that certainly falls on the shoulders of all of us within the Jewish community. So a big piece of what we are doing is empowering and educating young Jews, both to understand anti-Semitism, understand the various tropes, and also have the courage to call it out, and the courage both in having that education to know when they're seeing anti-Semitic tropes, but also to be proud Jews, right? And not feel alone. We do that through our LIFT program. We do it through our various campus offerings, Global Forum. But what I also want people to remember is that in a vacuum, you would think, and we all would think, that when we hear something anti-Semitic, we will call it out, right? And we should. But we have to remember that when you're on campus, there is something daunting. To be a young person, the only person in a room to raise your hand and call something out, that's a daunting task. And our role at AJC is, again, really educating and empowering our students to do that. But I want to say that our students who do deserve tremendous courage, because for all the statistics that Holly beautifully presented, we see that there are some unfortunate societal repercussions that may come with calling that out. And I'll say the other two things that are really critical to our work is amplifying those voices of young students. AJC is a huge platform, both with our social media, both also with having the ear of those who are in power. And we take that really seriously. When our students are expressing that something happened to them on their campus, trends they're seeing, it's our role at AJC to elevate that. We're doing that with university administrators as well. And those two pieces are really critical for us in ensuring that young Jews have what they need and that their voices are heard.
That's great. Holly, can you just share a little bit? And for everyone watching, all of our data, our survey, everything is available on our website, as well as our call to action that we're discussing, which includes all of these different essentially roadmaps for these different sectors of society, it also includes a checklist for people like you to download so that you can say, if I'm, reaching out to an elected official, these are the things that I want to see happen. These are the requests I'm making. So we're trying to give all of you a way to engage in this as well, because we know you care and we are grateful to all of you for that. But Holly, what are some examples of, you have been doing a great deal of corporate trainings. Can you just speak a little bit about what happens when you are approached by a corporation or a company, and you have an opportunity to speak to their particular audience? What is it we want them to understand as corporations? And then maybe we can also talk a little bit about what we're asking our allies to do, our coalition partners, our non-Jewish friends and supporters who probably need this information as well.
Absolutely. And Melanie, this is like a perfect question to why we ask the question about what's happening in the workplace, because we have been having companies come to us in the last few years looking for, trainings on understanding anti-Semitism, better understanding, who Jews are, how to better work with their Jewish employees. And we needed to have data about how American Jews were experiencing anti-Semitism in the workplace. And now we do. We know that, this 1 in 3 number have experienced, whether it's not being able to take time off of work for Jewish holidays, maybe even feeling physically unsafe. Like, we can share this with our corporate engagement and with our corporate partners. But what can employers do? And again, all of this is available on the call to action on our website as well under corporate America companies. So first, employers can speak out and condemn anti-Semitism unambiguously and unequivocally when incidents occur. That's our first immediate ask. But then for the longer term, we want to make sure that they can address anti-Semitism within the company, that their employees understand what it is, that they also understand who Jews are, and that they understand Jewish diversity and inclusion, and how that needs to be foundational within the company. We recommend trainings on anti-Semitism. We also recommend working with Jewish employees to understand needs, putting proper communication channels in place, which don't always exist. We encourage the establishment of an employee resource group, or an ERG, for Jewish employees if one doesn't already exist. And we also ask that we ensure that it's a cultural or an ethnic group, not just a religious group. Often Jewish employees are put into some kind of interfaith network, and we know that many Jews might not be religious, right? And so we want to make sure that Jewish employees are seen in the cultural or ethnic ERG lens. Companies can also educate, again, about what unconscious bias and stereotypes about Jews look like. They can educate about Jewish holidays. They can check for Jews. It sounds so simple, but we give them this checklist, and they are very appreciative, to check for Jewish holidays and make sure that company events and company meetings are not scheduled on one. And to your point about allyship, like, being a good ally also means not placing the burden on the Jewish employees to constantly raise the issue. And I think finally, one of the most impactful ways that partners can help in responding to anti-Semitism is checking in on the Jewish community, on Jewish colleagues, on Jewish neighbors, on Jewish friends, especially after an anti-Semitic incident occurs, but then using their collective voice to raise awareness and show allyship through public statements, through social media messaging. And that's something that we can see more of.
Thank you. I have another question, and you mentioned in terms of helping them understand and define it. Can you mention how AJC utilizes the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism?
Absolutely. So when you look at the sectors, all of the audiences that we go to, again, from the media, the companies, the partners, the educational institutions, everyone wants to know what they can do to counter anti-Semitism. Well, what can I do? How do I respond? How do I prevent it? And we constantly will say, well, you can't prevent, you can't even really respond until you recognize it, until you understand what it is, until you understand what it looks like today in all its contemporary forms. And so the starting place for all of our engagement is understanding anti-Semitism, and we refer all of these audiences to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism. We encourage its use, its adoption, endorsement, wherever it can be, again, used as an educational tool. And that's the starting point for all of our advocacy.
Thank you. So before we turn to audience questions, and I know we have many, I'd like to ask each of you, what gives you hope? What are the silver linings that we see? And Holly, why don't we start with you, and then Meggie, we'll turn to you.
So there is hopeful news, without a doubt. And the first is, again, that more Americans are familiar with anti-Semitism. I could not say that 2 years ago, but I can say that now. More Americans are familiar with what anti-Semitism is. More think it's a problem. And Melanie, this hasn't even come up yet, but more Americans say that denying Israel's right to exist is anti-Semitic. 90% of US adults said that the statement, Israel has no right to exist, is anti-Semitic. We can't compare directly to how we asked that question in 2020 because the mode of our survey changed slightly, but it was 74%. It was 3/4 of American society agreed that that statement was anti-Semitic. So we see that improvement. So that's a hopeful piece of news. And then what I appreciate specifically, again, is how more US adults who know Jews or who know about the Holocaust were more likely, again, to understand what anti-Semitism is, to understand that it's increasing, that it's a problem. And so we, again, have something to work with there. We can work toward Holocaust education. We can work to education about who Jews are, et cetera. And then finally, while the survey is about American Jewish experiences with anti-Semitism, we also don't want to focus solely on the negative and empower the anti-Semites in any way. So while 9 in 10 American Jews say anti-Semitism is a problem, 9 in 10 said that, the majority, they're still going to synagogue. The majority still feel safe. The majority, again, are not changing their behavior. And as I noted earlier, one Jewish person who is, that's one too many. But for the majority, it means it remains possible to be proudly Jewish. And the focus again here, and Meggie used this word, and I want to pick up on it and return to it and emphasize it, is community resilience, right? It's strengthening the Jewish community. So where incidents of anti-Semitism may be anticipated, the response is adapting swiftly, purposefully, so the community not only survives it, it actually thrives afterwards. And that way, no empowerment and no emboldening is given to those espousing the hate.
Thank you. And Meggie, what is giving you hope?
Yeah, so I actually want to go back in time, not that far back, but even before our survey, where one of the initial real surges we saw in anti-Semitism was in May 2021, and part of what we saw that was on the heels of attacks that came from Gaza into Israel, and that was extrapolated, especially to many campuses, where there was a real peak in anti-Semitism. And one of the things we saw, right, it could have been a fair assumption to say, like, Jewish students were just going to kind of sit there, stay silent, kind of hunker down. We saw the opposite, where we saw young Jews say, hey, I'm not going to let other people write my narrative. I'm not going to let other people tell me that I have done anything wrong or myself be a victim of anything. I am going to really stand up and call out what I see. And I think also, that was step one. I think step two became, I'm going to have a real pride in my Judaism. And I think that's a very, I've said this before, but I think it's like the most Jewish of ways. There are challenges that we do experience, but our very Jewish ethos is that we are going to find joy in who we are, joy in our community and our peoplehood. We're going to keep going to whatever it is, synagogue, JCC, cultural events. And that gives me a lot of pride that young Jews are making those conscious decisions to say, I'm not going to let anyone else take my voice away or determine who or what I do. I am really going to continue to be a really proud and, as Holly said, resilient Jew. That brings me a lot of pride. It makes me feel hopeful.
Great. Thank you both. And Claire, I know we have many questions and little time, so I will allow you to have the tough job of choosing the questions.
Thank you, Melanie. I'm going to try to combine a few, ask them at once so we can get through as many as possible. Our first one comes from Betsy Schneier in Seattle. She's asking, anti-Semitism often takes regional shapes, especially in the Pacific Northwest, where Jewish communities are smaller where I live. How can this be underscored in order to develop a more targeted approach to combat it? And another one is coming actually from many people on Zoom who wanted to follow up on the definition of anti-Semitism used for this survey. Can you share, Holly, how it was defined and what impact it could have had?
I'll do both. First, to Betsy's question, this is a fantastic question because, again, there is no one-size-fits-all approach to anti-Semitism. So while our data looked at how American Jews across the United States are experiencing the problem, although we did break it out into census data. So that will be available soon on our website, where you'll be able to actually interact with and see how does the North, how does the West compare with the South, compare with the Northeast. And those are some interesting findings to your point. But what we really need is that targeted regional focus, like a study's actually done on, well, where is anti-Semitism coming from the Pacific Northwest? We know there's probably a bigger problem on the far left in Seattle and in Portland than definitely, for instance, in Kansas City or other places where it might be more far right anti-Semitism. And so we need to know the sources of the problem to develop those, the right educational approaches, the right tools and tactics. What's useful about the call to action, though, is that regions know their localities and they can adopt and adapt what we're asking depending on those regional needs. And so I do think that should be done. Absolutely. And I thank you, Betsy, for pointing that out. The definition. No, we did not define the entire IRA definition I wish we could have, for our participants of US adults. So this year, we asked the question, how familiar are you with anti-Semitism? And we get some answers. That's the very first question that comes out. The second question is, to what extent do you think anti-Semitism, which is, and then we define it as hostility or prejudice against Jews, and like, do you think it's a problem in the U.S.? So we actually use a question, one of our next questions, to define what anti-Semitism is. 2 years ago, we just said the word hostility. We said it's a hostility towards Jews. And I wanted to change that a couple of years ago because that isn't capturing what anti-Semitism fully is. And the definition still doesn't fully capture it, but now we have that prejudice word as well, which kind of points to more of that conspiratorial element.
And if I can jump in, Claire, before you move on, in terms of the regional approaches, I just want to note I would be remiss in my duties as Chief Field Operations Officer if I didn't mention that AJC has 25 regional offices across the country that cover large territories, often beyond the boundaries of their cities, certainly in Seattle and across the Pacific Northwest. And they're working constantly to engage with elected officials, to meet with other community leaders, whether from churches or other civic organizations or partner communities. We're doing this kind of conversation and training across the country because we know it's so important. That first step is making people aware and helping them define and understand the many ways that anti-Semitism can manifest. And as Holly said, if they understand a little bit more about it, and they can understand that it's coming at us from different directions, it takes different forms, but it all has the same impact on the Jewish community, they can be better partners to us in combating it. So Meggie, anything you want to add before we turn back to Claire on this?
Thank you. Both have said that beautifully.
Great. Claire, back to you.
Thank you. Meggie, Alice Bresman on Zoom is asking, can you speak about high school students and what we may be able to do to prepare them to deal with issues in high school and also in college?
Yeah. So I should say that we at AJC run a program called Our Leaders for Tomorrow, where we are educating over 300 students a year on these very issues. And I think what's important also about our student population is they are purposely highly diverse. We have students who are from prep schools, public schools, Jewish day schools. To the question about geographic diversity, we have students who are in Kansas City, New York, LA. It's really a mix in an important way, a snapshot of what America and what American Jews look like. And what we are really aiming to do there are twofold. One is, again, that pride in one's Judaism, the confidence to speak up on these issues, the joy that we all know exists within Judaism. And the other part is really education and advocacy. We want our students, the survey that we're talking about now is something that all of our students will get and actually themselves. Holly also mentioned our call to action. That's something that we work on with our students. With campus, very much the same. And the one other lens actually that is less so from the student side, but from the other side is we work very closely with high school administrators to educate them about these very issues. I think for many, it's almost not something that they want to ignore. It's something they just don't know about, particularly if you are a head of school of, say, a high school that has very few Jewish students in it. That is something that we are working on with our call to action. And similarly, we have a critical role here at AJC through our Contemporary Jewish Life Department, who works with university administrators on these issues.
Great. Claire, back to you.
Thank you. Ray Termini is asking, did you find confusion in the minds of both Jews and non-Jews as to when criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic and when it's not? And was that addressed at all really in the survey?
So there's a couple interesting pieces here. We also asked about the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, and if both Jews and Americans, if they even were familiar with it. And I think some good news, which I didn't even share yet, is that most Americans are not familiar with the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel, which is, I think, is probably good. And then those who are, the majority think that it's either anti-Semitic or has some anti-Semitic supporters. So that actually is an interesting piece to add to the question. But I think your question was probably referring to the one I mentioned about Israel's right to exist. So this is how we frame it. We've asked this question over the last 3 years. We say, do you believe that the statement "Israel has no right to exist" is anti-Semitic? And this year, 9 in 10, basically, Americans and American Jews both said that, yes, that statement is anti-Semitic. Now, at AJC, we could probably take it a step further and say, that statement, that's a foundational core of anti-Zionism. And there is a majority of Americans who believe that statement is anti-Semitism, and that does help our efforts.
If I can jump in too and just add to Ray's question, I think it's a really important question. And what I know is that when we are engaging in these kinds of presentations or these conversations with corporations, with university leadership, with any of the cohorts with which we work with elected officials, they want to have that conversation. So we what our survey shows is a piece of this, but this is an important conversation where we're trying to help them understand that you can be critical of Israel. It is totally okay to criticize Israeli policies. But if you're saying Israel has no right to exist, if you're writing off Israel wholesale, if you're spray painting Free Palestine on the side of a synagogue, you have crossed a line into something that is really anti-Semitic. And we want to help them understand that nuance. It is a little confusing for some people, and we want to make sure they understand it. That again, it's okay to be critical of a government and governmental policies, but there is a line at which when you've crossed it, there's a problem.
And I should just add what Melanie just perfectly laid out is very much our roadmap for universities.
Thank you. And Melanie, this will be my last one before I turn it back to you. Melissa Rubin in Chicago is asking, thank you for all of this information about AJC's society-wide approach. Is AJC working with all of these sectors simultaneously, or is there one area, perhaps social media, that might be more urgent than the others?
I'll take a start, and then I can turn it to Meggie and maybe speak about educational institutions and Melanie as well. So right now there's 9 sectors that we've identified, and actually we're going to grow them. There's going to be more sectors forthcoming with more prescriptions, and so that's what I think is the beauty of this call to action. It's not a static resource. It's constantly going to be evolving as anti-Semitism changes and our response to it changes. Now, historically, AJC has been really focused on a couple of those sectors, government officials or coalition partners, et cetera. But we're moving into that corporate space, working really closely now with social media companies, given the fact that most anti-Semitism is online and on social media. We also look at the sectors and realize where we need to advance, how we need to work better with law enforcement to ensure that hate crime reporting is better collected and then reported out to the FBI so we have more information. And so right now, though, a big part of our effort really is going to be the social media companies. We have an action alert that came out, an awareness raising campaign that was launched yesterday again, that's going to the social media companies on what they can be doing to better combat anti-Semitism on their platform.
Yeah, just very quickly that, there are thousands of institutions of higher ed in the United States. Our goal right now, we would love to reach all of them, but part of our efforts are really to reach universities that have large Jewish populations, right? AJC held a summit with Hill International and the American Council on Education to do just this. It was a university summit on anti-Semitism, and we had over 40 university administrators there representing 40 different schools. And our goal there is really to try and have the largest reach. But of course, we know more work can be done. And that's, I think, part of the beauty of our call to action, to really bring in other partners to help us in this work.
So I would just say more is more is more is more. We are working hard. We appreciate all of you tuning in today. And before I turn it back to Claire, I just want to thank you, Holly, and thank you, Meggie. It's been really important to have this discussion. And thank you to everyone who has joined us today. We really appreciate your engagement. And with that, Claire, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you, Meggie, Holly, and Melanie, for today's important and timely conversation. And thank you to our global audience for tuning in today. Be sure to stay engaged in AJC's essential work combating anti-Semitism. You can access the full report, important resources, and other ways to take action at ajc.org/antisemitismreport 2022. Thank you again, and goodbye.